Yes, no. As Charlotte said, we have done a lot of excavations in Jelling, and what I'm going to focus on is the implications of some of the excavations that we can now go into some of the surrounding of Jelling. One of the problems with the Jelling monuments being that, as Lotte said, there's been a lot of focus on the standing monuments. And because this is a monument of sort of national significance, there has always been a sort of inertia in the interpretations. Once you have a coherent interpretation, it's very difficult to move it. But when the Jelling project started, we were in a situation where we had to take into account that our results might lead to a deconstruction of an established narrative in order to create a new one. And one of our objectives was to go beyond Jelling, to sort of break the isolation of this national monument. And fortunately, we were able to do so because the new evidence tied in so well with other results from the Danish area. And just to give you this another view of the monuments, we have the two mounds, the Romanesque church, and in front of the Romanesque church, King Harald Bluetooth's runestone, which is this national monument. And I doubt that, well, you may not know it by heart, but most Danes do, that this Harald King, he had this monument made in honor of his father, Gorm, and in honor of his mother, Thyra. And having commemorated them, he goes on to sort of commemorate himself. He was the Harald who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christians. And that is fairly easy to read. But what did he exactly say? What does he mean when he says that he won for himself all of Denmark? This has been a great matter of debate. Did he reconquer territory that was lost? Did he, as many say, conquer Denmark? Or was it more a matter, and this is the sort of current belief, that he prevailed over other contenders to the throne? So he actually really won it for himself. It's important to look at this word won. And it's also been pointed out that rather than having this monument made, he ordered it be made. This wording that he orders something, this is also something that is new in a runic connection. So this is the runestone. And with the words of the runestone, we wanted to look at sort of how did Jelling fit into the rest? How did Harald achieve all that he said he did? By what means and what strategies did he move forward? And as Charlotte said, when we started this excavation, we knew there was traces of a palisade. And we had several people coming in as part of the archaeological team. Some of them, they came from Truso. And as you can see here, we have Truso on Sjælland, west of Lake Truso, a settlement, a very important settlement, obviously, characterized by a long continuity. And as you can see at this point here, at least 11,000 metal artifacts. Covering a long period. The site itself has also undergone a slight change. When the first excavations took place, this was a significant manor. Within the last 2-3 years, it has become a significant royal manor. So the excavators, they have moved along in their interpretation from manor to royal estate. So here we have a royal estate characterized by a long continuity and by many, many metal artifacts. And those who came from Truso, they were so disappointed when they came to Jelling. Major disappointment. Because as you can see, we started with the area north of the monuments, doing non-invasive surveys with metal detector, with EMS and so on. And there was very little. Metal detector amateurs from Bornholm came over so that we were certain that we had the best qualified. And they grew steadily more irritable because they didn't find anything. I think a weekend's worth of metal detector surveying led to less than a handful of datable objects, including one coin, fortunately. So we tried to do trial trenches, as you can see here. And we followed trial trenches. They gave us an impression of the landscape. It had been far more hilly, and it had been far more waterlogged than we actually knew of. But there were no traces of actual settlement north of the monuments. And this picture also gives you an impression of how far you can actually see from the monuments. There's a vast view from the monument site. And this is then an aerial photo of the monument site, the palisade complex, looking southwards. In the area between the monument complex and the lake to the south, we knew of settlement continuity from around the birth of Christ to the beginning of the monument, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. It seemed as if this was an ordinary settlement. There was not this continuity of wealth that we see at Truso or we see at this almost mythical site of Laiva. We have quite a few excavations marked here. We have in a total uncovered about 21,000 square meters of this site. But the palisade complex in itself covers 12.5 hectares. And that's about 5 times the size of any other Viking Age manor that we know of. Yes, and as Lotta showed you, this is our result. And we have the palisade, the extent of the palisade, and we have 3 buildings in the northeast quadrant, near identical buildings. And let me see. But you can see the measurements, the sides here, taking account any irregularities on the slightly uneven background. We can see that the measurements here, they are about 360 meters. This proposed ship setting, 358, but it just fits inside. There is a 40-20 division, approximately. We have distance from palisade to building, approximately 120 meters. Distance between the 2 buildings, about 60 meters. And then from building to palisade, and this was very fortunate, the buildings are aligned with the palisade. The distance from building to palisade equals half of a building length. So it's very much a matter of geometry and things that fit very closely together. And this was sort of an indication of where we are in time. This was very, it seemed linked to King Harald Bluetooth. And with the new datings, we have the link with the Ravning Bridge, with the fortresses, and with the Dannevirke. And I was just going to show you some of the images. We have the fortresses here, circular fortresses, very well known from Denmark. There are 4 that have been identified. The 4 first, the old ones. 2, candidates from Scania. 1 that is seemingly older, and then perhaps Borgeby, which is more similar, and then the last one, Borgby. All of them are characterized by this geometric layout, completely circular, and then with the streets running through from corner to corner in a right-angled cross. and then Agaspor, the last one here, which is so much bigger than the other known ones. And I just wanted to bring also Bowen, the last results. This is on Eastern Sjælland, results of a recent excavation by Søren Sindbæk and Nana Holm. The location was very similar to what we might expect from a ring fortress, and there was a ring here. They did geomagnetics. Nana pointed out a site to the north, slightly off the true north, where there might be a gate. It was excavated, and there was in fact a gate with burnt timbers, and a carbon-14 dating of the timbers indicate 10th century. So it was true. And as an additional element, 90 degrees to the east from this gate, exactly 90 degrees, they found another gate. So it's very likely that Borgweg belongs to the group. And if we look at them, then we have the Trelleborg here, the right angle cross, Agaspor, the right angle cross, and in Jelling, the right angle cross again, but turned 45 degrees, so that you might say that here, when you approach the fortresses, the circular fortresses, your gaze goes around, sort of goes around the site. But when you come to Jelling, for instance, from the Army Road to from the west, your gaze and your path is blocked by a completely straight line of 360 meters. So the visual impression of approaching Jelling here from the corners of the compass would have been different from the one you would have when you approach a round structure. So here is a difference, and I was just going to show you this. If we take Agaspor and put it in, it fits in very nicely within Jelling, and we can see that the sites from Jutland here, they seem to have the same standard measurements. 120 meter inner diameter in Fyrkat, 240 at Agaspor, and 360 at Jelling. So there are similar measurements, similar standards of measurement. And these standards of measurement, this rigidity in the construction and the identity of the identical templates used in the buildings, are often interpreted as evidence of central control and royal power. But as Charlotte said, it is also a precondition for the construction of this massive building program. So that if speed is required, if resources from a larger area is required, then standards would be a very good idea, because then you can order and have it delivered and then fit it on site. So there is a very prosaic interpretation behind this as well. So if we look at the houses, we have the Fyrkat buildings, very clearly identified, fifths, and here with the curved long walls and the curved roof ridge. So the identification of the building type gave in advance a 10th century date. If we look at them, there are slight differences. Fyrkat very clearly subdivided into fifths, in Jelling subdivided into fourths, plus a little annex here. So it seems as if the Jelling buildings are slightly older and perhaps a prototype for the buildings in the fortresses. And the dendrochronology indicates that, in fact, the Jelling complex was most likely earlier than the fortresses. And that shot a hole through the interpretation that the fortresses were sort of the template for Jelling. it's the other way around. So we looked for inspiration to Jelling, and that might come from the rural architecture. So traditional architecture, here we see farm buildings, main farm buildings, multifunctional buildings with stabling at one end and then the living quarters at the other end. If we remove the stabling end, then we have the exact template for the Jelling buildings, which have then an annex added, which in the fortresses is integrated into the building. And if we go further, we might also in the settlements find models for the layout of the complex. Even though the complex is extravagant in size, the layout is quite reasonable, with a main building at the center of the farmstead and then subsidiary buildings along the fence. This means also that, as at Lisbia here, where we have an older building connected with the farm under the Romanesque church, the area under the Romanesque church in Jelling becomes interesting for us, but I'm not going to talk about that because that is a very complicated issue. But here we have also the Truso main building, subsidiary buildings along the fence. So, with that, we can see that the Jelling complex probably drew on inspiration from other sites, rural sites. Lotte talked about the Rauning-Enge Bridge down here. The Rauning-Enge Bridge is only 10 kilometers south of Jelling, and it lies on an alternative corridor, a parallel corridor to the Army Road, which runs up here and around this small lake, and then gives a very, very impressive approach to Jelling. We have discussed why place the bridge here in the broadest part of the river valley. Again, we have a prosaic reason that would minimize the risk of destruction through flooding and ice, but also that it gave the most impressive monument, one that is long and an example of the king's command of resources and technological skill. So that may be one of the reasons why this monument is there. It's not just a bridge, it also gives an approach to Jelling. We have the Dannebjerge, Vidukund of Corvey, who talks of war with Danes, and in front of Dannebjerge, from our point of view, is the connecting wall, which has dendro dates of 965, 968, which indicates that it was extended in the time of King Harald Bluetooth. And then we have the Korbjerge, which in technology is very similar to the fortresses. So a lot of monuments bringing together a sort of language of power, which you can see here, the fortresses all here, with very short travel distances between them. So in a sense, all these monuments, Jelling lying midway between Aarhus, which was fortified in the second half of the 10th century, and then Ribe, and then these sites here. So they are elements of military kind, but at the same time a sort of visual demonstration of the royal statement that he won for himself all of Denmark. So we have this visual element of it. Oh, there we have Denmark, which is supposedly this area, and the Skagerrak and Kattegat, as a colleague has put it, the Mare Nostrum of the Danes. Like that. I was just going to go through some other examples that show that the Jelling compound and the other compounds, they build on traditional materials, on traditional building types, on traditional monument types. So we see elsewhere in Scandinavia older examples of ship settings, of huge burial mounds. Looking at the burial mounds, we might also see another strategy of King Harald, that of grave plundering. The north mound in Jelling is empty. And we can see here that most recent results from Oseberg and Gokstad in Vestfold, that is the Danish area of interest, that although the Oseberg mound here, the burial, the funeral, was from 834, the break-in took place between 953 and 970, according to dendrochronology. So there is a break-in horizon in the second half of the 10th century in some of these huge mounds. They may be break-ins ordered by King Harald, or if in Norway, perhaps by his opponents. So there was a competition in this Vestfold area that royal power wasn't quite secure. So this is the area that we have with Denmark here, and then with the Nordic competitors here, where the traditional monuments in Denmark, they are linked to this area. The southern mound in Jelling, which is empty, may have been built to fill in something like this to create a plurality of monuments similar to that in Gamla Uppsala. There are two burials in Jelling, but one is hidden. So, in my opinion anyway, the south mound was necessary to maintain the visual impression of Queen Tyra and King Gorm. Without the south mound, that statement doesn't work. So we have to have it. So that is one of the strategies, possibly, of King Harald. And then we look to the southern area. Where did the inspiration come from? There is most likely inspiration from here. There are shared ideals. There are marriage alliances with the area south of the Baltic. They were also on the periphery of the Ottonian Empire. And here I'm not going to say it, but here, there are weapons from the lake that are very closely linked to Scandinavian weapons. We can see halls of power, buildings that were meant to impress people. Monumental architecture is a means to communicate. And here, this we've seen before, but maybe this was the same element that we want to show in King Harald's building works. We have the use of space. If we look at Aachen, contemporaries, they talk of the amazing ingenuity, the incredible skills, and the amazing beauty of the site. If we look at King Harald's monuments, we see exactly the same. The scale, the ingenuity, the skills required, and then in the case of the runestone, the object of amazing beauty. So the form is very different, but the way of using architecture and monuments to communicate a message is very similar. And here, family, friends, allies. We can see here very glimpses into another strategy. People, they intermarry. And the Danes are part of this European intermarrying that we see. The art of giving. We've talked about gifts. And we don't know what the Danes brought back from the Easter Assembly in Quedlinburg in 973. But these objects here, they are perhaps examples of what the Danes brought with them to negotiations with the empire. And here we have a well-known gift from the year 1000. It would be very interesting to know whether Harald Bluetooth also had received such a spearhead. He might have. We have a wooden copy, but I think it's very much later than this one. And then another very, very small scale strategy, coinage. King Harald tries to put out a new coinage. And a colleague in the Jelling project has just published his analysis of this coinage. I brought a flyer with me so that you can see the book, but it shows us very clearly that in this process, the cross and the crucifixion are the elements that were earliest understood. And with that, I'm going to end this paper, that we can see now the contours of a new form of kingship which emerges in the 10th century. And King Harald is a proponent of it. And he has to balance between a local population who understand the runes and then his neighboring countries who provide sort of the ideals that he is aiming at, and some of the similar strategies that he employs but changed over into sort of a locally understandable language. If you want to communicate something, you choose size, you choose monumental expression, but you don't choose a monument that's so alien that your message is lost. And I think that's what we see here. A balancing between something new and something old, creating a new form of kingship. And then all these monuments that we've talked about, they vanish. And people have said, oh, well, that's because Harald Bluetooth failed. I think it's because actually Harald Bluetooth succeeded. The new the new concept of kingship is put forward, and a new platform is created that his son and grandson can build upon. But because the platform has been established, the means to establish the platform are no longer necessary, so they disappear.